This is the first hand plane that I ever restored. It's a type 16, I believe, number 5. Nice little jack plane in overall good condition. Sat around for a little bit even here. I had a leaking pipe, so I've got to clean that up. But a friend of mine is interested in this, so I'm going to go ahead and retune it, get it back into fighting shape, and send it out to him. So being my first plane that I ever restored, there's some things that I was ignorant to. We'll say my sharpening, I guess, was mediocre at best. So we'll retouch up the back mostly. So I did not have perfectly flat back. I did not polish anything, so this is going to get cleaned up, polished, and super sharp. We'll probably just have to tune this edge. This is okay on this side. Go through the grits, hit the strop. This will be in fighting shape. The chip breaker. I didn't really spend too much time on this, making sure that it was flat, so I'll revisit this and make sure that it's perfect. The cap iron, I never touched, and with the exception of that little chip, which shouldn't matter in the long run. So I'll go ahead and flatten this to make sure I've got good contact between the cap iron, the chip breaker, and then the chip breaker and the iron across here. And then other than that, I'll probably just go ahead and do a quick lap of the sole and oil it, package it, send it out. So I'm going to start off with these end roll cutoffs that I got from Klingspor's Woodwork Shop. I've got a 60 grit, 150 grit, 320 grit. These have an adhesive backing on them, so I'll just peel off the backing, slap it on my joiner, go to work. Nice flat surface, and then greater than 320, I'm going to move up through finer grits. So I've got a whole stack of 2500, 7000 grits. So I'll work through these and polish, and then while that works really well, they're not going to be perfectly flat. So once I get them pretty good, I'll come over and I'll hit them with my 1000 grit Waterstone, 5000 grit Waterstone, and then I will strop, and they will be super sharp. So I've got my 60 grit on my jointer, and I'm really only worried maybe about the last inch or so of the plane iron. So I'm going to run it flat with consistent, even pressure, and it doesn't have to be hard pressure. I'm just going to go on a pull stroke. That's most convenient for me until I get a nice consistent scratch pattern all the way from the edge, and I really only need like the last 1/8 of an inch to edge of clean metal, and then I'll start moving up through the grits. This will take a while, so I'll catch back up with you after a minute. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes into it, almost made it. Just had a little bit more on the edge there. These always seem to take forever, just that final little bit, and that's pretty deep, so I've got a ways to go on material removal. Maybe another few more minutes. So there we go. Something probably 10 minutes or so on some 60 grit sandpaper. And I said this was already pretty well lapped, but even if it had looked like that, if it had looked like this, I still could have gotten here in maybe 20 minutes, 15 minutes with just some minimal work, again on 60 grit sandpaper. So before I take this off the joiner, I'm going to grab the lever cap and the cap iron and the chip breaker. So for the chip breaker, really we just want consistent contact on this part here of this curved piece to be flat. So I'll reference across here to here, and we will do the same thing that we did with the iron, but we'll just do it from the other side of this hump to the edge. And it'll look something like this, except for with two hands. Anytime you're doing this by hand, it's important to remember that your pressure and the motion should come from the side that's pushing down on the grit. Anything out here is just to make sure that the orientation up or down is held constant. If you're applying any kind of angle, that's more for like knife. Anyway, knife or chisel sharpening, you use this hand more than you do your, in my case, left hand for applying this constant pressure. And slow, even strokes. So I can do this one-handed just by pushing and pulling with my index finger. Right. And we can already see a fairly consistent scratch pattern, so I shouldn't have much work to do on this. All right, that's all I'm going to do on the 60 grit. Nice clean line there. So next is the chip breaker. Same thing. I'm just going to run this edge is what needs to be dead flat, so we'll run it across the last inch or so and get this nice and flat and smooth. And there we go. 60 grit work is done. So I'll switch out this 60 grit sandpaper now for the next grit up. Typically you want a double grit or thereabout on your way up. So I got 60, I'll go to 150, and then I'll go to 320, and then I'll work my way up into, since I don't have any 600 grit, I'll just go right into the 1500 grit papers. And then we'll just do it again. So now I don't really have any flattening to do. All I really need to accomplish is to take this 60 grit scratch pattern to 150 grit scratch pattern. So I'll do until I remove and have a nice consistent 150 grit scratch pattern. Apply pressure with my fingers and pull it across. I don't have to do a lot of pressure again, just consistent pressure. And I'll probably do about 10 strokes, 15 strokes, and then I'll check it. So it's 15 strokes. There's still some pretty deep scratches in there, so I'll do another 10 or 15 strokes and I'll check it again. And there it is. Clean, consistent 150 grit scratch pattern. So I'll go ahead and do the cap iron and the chip breaker next. I've got a pretty significant burr all the way across here, so actually sharpening the edge should not be too difficult. That's already pretty flat. And that's it. Time to move up to the 320 grit. And here's one I learned from Ryan over at Scanwoods. Not sure how you pronounce your name there, Ryan. Magnets work really well to clean up metal shavings off of your sandpaper as you're moving along. Here's an example of this being the first plane that I ever sharpened, so it might help explain why I was having issues getting even shavings. My iron is far from square. I'm not going to worry about that when flattening the back. This will be taken care of when I sharpen this edge. Should correct itself. And there we go. About 15 passes on each, 20 passes on each. Nice even 320 grit scratch pattern. And I'll post-it note adhesive in the can, repositionable. Nice healthy coat. Now I can put that on my jointer and it'll come right back up. No problem. And that's the 1500 grit. Now we're starting to get that nice polished look, but polished only gets you so far. Really, flat is better than shiny. So making sure that you are perfectly flat across this entire face is absolutely important. Shiny just helps. And that's all the way up through 5,000 grit. So I'll hit the cap iron with the 1,000 and 5,000 grit water stone and the chip breaker just to make sure that it's dead flat. I don't trust there's irregularities in the sandpaper grain thickness, so the water stones will just help to make sure that those are actually flat. Hi. I'm actually only applying pressure on the pull stroke. That's my confidence stroke. Everybody's a little bit different. You might be able to get more consistent results by pushing while applying pressure, but for me, it's most consistent to apply pressure from here to here, and then I just slightly push. So most of the abrasive action is happening on the pull stroke for me. And then should be able to do similar then with the sandpaper and just check every 10 or 15 strokes and make sure that it's flat, so we should be able to see the scratch pattern adjusting. So it's actually looking pretty good. We'll keep going. So that's actually really good. I'll probably do a little bit more. It's hard to see. So I was at 5,000 grit. This stone is 1,000 grit. So if it's shinier, then I'm not making contact. I've got just a little spot there that I'm making light contact. So I'll go for a little bit more until I have a nice consistent 1,000 grit scratch pattern here, and then I'll move through the cap iron and the chip breaker also and look for the same thing. And there it is. A little shiny spot's gone. So that's a nice consistent flat surface on the back. So I can go up to the 5,000 grit stone and then run through the chip breaker and cap iron, and then after that I can address the bevel edge. I'll show you how I go through and fix this uneven or not 90-degree face, which is vital for the plane to work properly. So my method for squaring up my iron is I take my combination square that I know is square, and I take a fine point Sharpie and I draw a line. So now I have a point of reference. Put my iron in my honing jig, and I'll just get to work until I bring both the sides flat, dead nuts across that line. All right, so that's brought back pretty darn close to 90. And that was on some 60 grit sandpaper. So now I'm going to go to my 320 grit stone. I'm only going to do the 320 grit on the primary bevel, and then I'm going to do a secondary or micro bevel. That'll finish cleaning this up. Should get rid of that burr that you see there, and then I'll go back to flattening the back some and then retune the micro bevel, and then this beast is done. I should be able to put it back together and get some pretty decent shavings, but I'll lap the sole of the plane first. Here we go. That is ground to 25-degree bevel angle. You can see nice burr all the way across, which means I've got good contact. It should be flat, so I'm gonna work on the micro bevel here for just a minute and get that a little bit straighter, and then I'll work on polishing the back just a little bit more. And then the blade is done. I can move on to the plain body and then test this fella out. The micro bevel is polished, or established and polished. So a 25-degree primary bevel, a 30-degree secondary bevel or micro bevel is good for pretty much most applications with a hand plane. So now we'll go back to fixing up the bottom of this thing, hit it with the strop, get to work. You know you're on the right track for flatness when your iron sticks. Just from the water. Final step is the strop. I've got some buffalo butt hide here. You got the inside, which is the rougher. This is all pressed, so this is rough, but it's still smooth, uniform thickness. And then I have the show side, which is shinier, but also uniform thickness. So I've got that sandwiched onto a flat piece of wood, in this case walnut. So I'll do my initial strop with the rough side and then my final strop with the flat side. I don't use a compound. You don't have to with certain types of leather. The buffalo butt hide has a high silica content, so this actually does it for you, so you don't have to worry about brushing in compound with this type of leather. Stropping is easy to round over your nice sharp edge. So the best way I found to do this is to position yourself so you can lock your elbow next to your side. You place your iron or chisel or whatever on the strop. You lift up until you find the primary bevel. When you find the primary bevel, this will actually deform enough to where it'll contact the secondary bevel. And then you just lock your elbow, wrist, everything, pull back from your hips, applying light, consistent pressure. And then you do maybe 10 to 20 pulls like that. And there's the shave test. Very sharp. So this iron's done. Here you can see why we only have to flatten the very the very edge here, right? And that's because there's no actual contact, meaningful contact, I should say, until you get up to the edge. And the chip breaker's job is to support that blade and push shavings away and clear the throat. So blade support all the way across. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and just double check the bottom of the sole of this. Throw it on the jointer with some 220 grit sandpaper and just make sure that I at least have contact on the tote end and the front here, the knob end, and then an even ring. It's okay if it's hollowed in the middle a little, as long as the surfaces on the front side and back side and the sides are flat. It'll do its job. But it's important that you have the frog in place and everything tightened down. For some reason, that actually pulls the plain body a little bit and makes sure that this is flat. So if you flatten this without the frog in, you're going to introduce error. And I hope this would be obvious, but make sure that your iron that you just spent all of this time sharpening is nowhere near the front of this. So push your frog all the way back, fully retract your blade. And now to lap your plane sole, and you're just going to put it on your flat surface. And I like to push down evenly on both sides or rails here and just light, continuous pressure, push and pull. Push and pull. Don't push on the knobs, totes, or on the frog. You could push down and bend the body and screw everything up. First test run. The mouth is pretty open, but the depth is pretty thick, so I'm going to keep messing with this to see how far I can go, but it's good. It's pretty damn good. Tuned up really well. Too bad I can't plane for shit. Yeah, that's pretty good. It also does beautiful ribbons like a jack plane should. Good number 5. Way up to 150 grit on the bottom. So it's not perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. Mostly flat. It's flat enough. Just posted a video of the shavings that I can take with this. As a jack plane, it'll definitely work pretty well as a smoother. It's real nice. Type 16, 80 years old. Beautiful.